Hello, my name's Callista. My sister accused me of faking my college degree, and everyone believed her. Not one person asked me if it was true. They just stepped back. I lost a speaking invitation, a job offer, even a friend I'd known for 15 years. But worse than the lie, it was the silence, the quiet agreement to let me disappear, to let her version of me become the truth. She said I didn't deserve the spotlight, but what if she was the one who never wanted to share it? Do you know what it feels like to be erased by your own family? And do you know what happened when the truth finally came out? Stay with me, I'll show you. My father turned 70 this year. We hadn't thrown him a proper party in a long time, not since before his second stroke. And even then, those celebrations had always been more about what looked good on paper than what felt good in the room. This time, though, everyone showed up. The house in the suburbs of Denver was full. Siblings, cousins, second wives, half-siblings, distant uncles who somehow always found their way back when there was free food and someone else's milestone. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always. Marla was already there, of course. Hair done, dress impeccable, laugh just loud enough to claim space without looking attention-seeking. She had the gift table organized, had already instructed the caterers, and was holding court by the fireplace like she owned the place. She saw me and gave a small wave, one of those air kisses that never landed. I smiled back, tight-lipped. I'd trained myself to be polite, especially in rooms where I wasn't the one people expected to succeed. Dinner was the usual: chicken breasts in lemon caper sauce, dry bread rolls, a few bottles of mediocre red wine that my father pretended to love because his second wife did. The dining table was packed. I was squeezed between a cousin who once borrowed money and never paid me back, and a step-nephew who kept asking if I was still working at that little thing with schools. Then it happened. Midway through dessert, someone made a toast. I think it was my Uncle Raymond. He raised his glass, spoke about legacy and being proud of the family we've built. When he turned to Marla, he said something about her being the shining example. And then he glanced in my direction and said, "And Callista, you're doing something with kids, right?" Before I could respond, before I could even breathe in, Marla laughed. "I still say Callista's diploma is the best Photoshop I've seen." A few chuckles rippled through the table. Not everyone laughed, but no one stopped her. Not even my mother, who looked down at her napkin like she could fold herself into it. I smiled. Not a smirk. Not a grimace. A real smile. The kind you give when your body tenses so hard it needs something to release the pressure. I didn't speak. I didn't defend myself. I looked straight at my plate, and I smiled because it was the only thing I could control. After dinner, people scattered around the living room. Marla made her way to the piano, where a cousin was playing old songs from the 70s. I stood near the bookshelf, half listening, sipping sparkling water, because the wine didn't feel earned tonight. That's when it happened again. A cousin, one I barely knew, walked up beside me and asked, "Which school did you graduate from again?" I turned to her slowly. "CU Boulder," I said. She nodded. "Oh, right. Right." Then she smiled like she was trying to hide her real question. I didn't push. There was no point. I'd heard that tone before, the one where people pretend to be curious, but they're really just verifying a rumor. I stayed another hour, made small talk, handed my father his gift, a vintage watch I'd been saving for. He hugged me with one arm, eyes half focused on Marla, who was telling a story about her promotion. It was already dark when I left. Snow flurried quietly across the windshield as I drove home. No music, just the hum of the heater and the rhythm of my thoughts, cut sharp by silence. Back in my apartment, I didn't take off my coat right away. I stood in front of my bookshelf, eyes locked on the framed diploma above my desk. The glass had a smudge in the corner, maybe from when I moved last year, or maybe from the time I almost took it down after reading one too many anonymous comments on LinkedIn. I reached up and removed it from the wall. Not in anger, not in shame. I just needed to feel the weight of it in my hands again. Not the metaphorical weight, the literal one. The heaviness of laminated paper, of 4 years, 2 jobs, 3 unpaid internships, and one exhausted woman barely keeping it together through final exams. I wiped the glass with my sleeve, set it gently on the desk. Then I said it aloud. "You're going to try and erase me again, Marla? Let's see who vanishes first." I left the diploma on the desk overnight. The next morning, I stared at it while sipping black coffee. Not because I didn't believe it was mine, but because I was preparing to see the face of doubt again. And this time, it wouldn't be hiding in family jokes or party whispers. It would have new voices, colleagues, friends, people who hadn't even been in the room Saturday night, but who'd already heard just enough to form their own unspoken opinions. When I walked into the office that Monday, everything looked the same. Cube walls, recycled air, a coffee pot that sputtered like it was always one shift away from retirement. But something in the way my coworker, Janice, glanced up when I passed, told me it wasn't. 10 minutes later, as I stirred powdered creamer into my second cup of coffee, Brandon from data entry leaned casually against the break room door. "You went to CU Boulder, right?" he asked, folding his arms. "I heard they changed the diploma layout a few years ago. Like, the font and the gold trim are totally different now." I didn't blink. I didn't ask him where he'd heard that. Instead, I turned to him and said, "Yeah, I graduated before the change. The original design's kind of classic." He nodded slowly, like he was filing my answer away somewhere private. "Makes sense." Then he left. Just like that. No further questions, no confrontation. Just a single spark he hoped would land somewhere flammable. But I wasn't going to let him see the smoke. That evening, Lowell came over. I hadn't said much to him about the party, only that it was the usual. I didn't want to unload while still figuring out what exactly had been set in motion. He brought tea, something with ginger and honey, and sat next to me on the couch. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." There was a pause. Then he shifted slightly toward me, setting the mug on the table. "I was just wondering, do you still have your transcript? Not that I don't believe you," he added quickly. "It's just, people talk." I didn't say anything. I stood up, walked to the hallway, closed the door between us. Not loudly, not with malice, just firmly, cleanly. I stood there in the kitchen, watching the refrigerator's light reflect off the tile. It wasn't about the transcript. It was about what kind of woman he believed I was, or wasn't, the moment someone planted a seed of doubt in his mind. And it wasn't the first time. The next day, I was on hold with the bank after checking my account and seeing a security flag on a decade-old transaction, a third-party request for verification of tuition disbursement. 10 years ago, who the hell does that? The voice on the phone couldn't tell me who submitted the request, just that it was flagged and denied. But I knew. Or at least, I had a good guess. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Marla. I didn't start a fight in the family group thread. I opened my laptop and pulled out every scanned file I'd been collecting since I graduated. I sorted them into folders, transcripts, award letters, financial aid documents, recommendation emails from professors, every job offer I'd ever received. Everything was dated, titled, backed up. Then I backed it up again. That night, I got a text from Mom's Sunday lunch, just us girls. "I'll make that pasta you like." I typed a reply, "Sorry." Got a few things to finish up for work. Rain check, I didn't add a smiley face. Didn't leave the door open. Just a short, polite message. Enough to make her think I was busy, not hurt. Which at this point was a lie I had learned to wear like perfume. Faint, but intentional. Dinner that evening was leftover soup and an egg I cracked too hard. I ate on the couch, my laptop open, organizing files with a precision that looked more like obsession than caution. Later, while scrolling through old texts, I found one from Marla, 2 years back, around Christmas. "You'll always be my wild card. Sometimes I wonder how you made it through college at all." I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumb hovered over the delete button. Then I pressed it, not out of fragility, but clarity. That version of her, she didn't get to live in my archives anymore. I spent the rest of the night on the floor with my back against the couch, a box of records around me. Notebooks, tax forms, printed evaluations. It looked like a small war room. I labeled each folder, marked each year, sorted each category until the only thing left was silence. Silence and certainty. I slid the final folder into the drawer and locked it. Then I whispered to the stillness around me. They want proof, fine. But when I speak next, it won't be a whisper. Morning light crept through the curtains as I sat alone at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold half an hour earlier. I'd spent most of the night filing and scanning until the silence in my apartment felt louder than the city outside. Somewhere between organizing transcripts and color-coding folders, I had moved from frustration to clarity. Not peace, just clarity. I had promised myself I wouldn't go back to my parents' house anytime soon, but the documents they needed for an estate-related matter were still with me, and avoiding the place wouldn't erase the paperwork. So, later that afternoon, I drove across town with a manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat like it weighed 50 pounds. The front door was already open when I pulled up. Mom had texted to say she'd leave it unlocked since she might be on the phone. I walked in, called out a quick, "Just dropping this off," and placed the envelope on the entryway table. No one answered, but I heard her voice from down the hall, probably in the office on another Zoom call with her church committee. Before leaving, I paused by the living room. That wall of family photos had always been her pride. Decades of memories framed with obsessive symmetry. Birthdays, baby showers, holiday portraits, school milestones, all carefully curated. I glanced at the top row where my college graduation photo used to hang. Gone. In its place was a shot of Marla standing at a podium, mid-speech, clutching an award from some community leadership program she'd joined after her divorce. Her face was lit by applause and stage lights. Below it, a small engraved plate making us proud. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that empty space where I once existed. A faint outline remained on the wall. My frame had left a sun-bleached square in the paint. They hadn't even bothered to clean it. I guess I graduated into the void, I murmured to myself. Back in my car, the engine hummed, but I didn't drive right away. My hands gripped the wheel while my mind went backward, 10 years, give or take, into a version of my life I rarely revisited. I remembered that day cap too tight, robe wrinkled from the dry cleaner, forgetting to press it. I walked across the stage at CU Boulder, heard my name called, felt my fingers tighten around the rolled-up diploma holder they give you before the real one arrives in the mail. I smiled for a photo that no one in my family ever requested. No one came. The excuse a cousin's baby shower had been scheduled on the same day. And, in true form, Marla had posted on Facebook, "So proud of my baby cousin graduating this weekend." A celebration. Just not for me. It wasn't just that they didn't show up. It was the way they redirected everyone else. Made sure no one remembered I was walking that stage. It was subtle, elegant, and cruel. Like watching a house slowly sink while someone sips wine on the front porch. Back home that evening, I couldn't sleep. I logged into Facebook, something I hadn't done in weeks, and scrolled through my memories. There it was, the post I had written that day. Finally did it. Graduated. Grateful for the grind. Onward. 2 likes. Both from classmates. No comments from family. Not even a reaction from Lowell. Not that I expected one. We hadn't met yet. I didn't delete the post. I screenshotted it and saved it to my new evidence folder. Not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to see what absence looked like when it was digitally preserved. A museum of my own invisibility. I stepped away from the screen and paced around the apartment, restless. The memory had already opened the door to others. I remembered the silence after the ceremony, the echo of heels on pavement as I walked alone to my car, the grocery store sushi I picked up on the way home, the bottle of cheap white wine I opened that night while watching reruns of shows I didn't even like. My phone had buzzed once, just one message. "Hey, Sorry we couldn't make it. It was just too much to juggle today. Marla sends love. No signature, no apology. Just another way of telling me I hadn't mattered enough to schedule around. I ate dinner at my kitchen counter, still in my gown, and later that night, I booked my first therapy session. That day taught me something important. I can survive being invisible, but not being erased. By the time the sky had turned a darker shade of navy, I had made up my mind. I went to the closet and pulled out the spare frame I'd bought months ago at a flea market, brushed the dust off. It was heavier than I remembered, modern, with clean lines and no embellishments. I printed another copy of my diploma from the digital file I'd saved years ago and placed it inside. Then I set it on the windowsill in my office, angled slightly toward the light. I didn't need anyone to see it. I just needed to see it for myself, not as validation, as memory. I logged into my work email to check a few project updates before bed. As I was about to log off, a new message appeared. Subject line: Credential Review Inquiry. Hi, Callista. Would you have a moment to meet tomorrow? A formal request has come in regarding your academic background, and we'd like to clarify a few things internally before proceeding. Nothing urgent, but best addressed sooner than later. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I didn't type. I closed the laptop. I didn't sleep much that night. The email had been short, formal, polite, vague in the way only HR emails could be, but it landed like a cold hand pressed to the back of my neck. I lay in bed for hours, eyes open in the dark, rehearsing answers to questions no one had asked out loud yet. By morning, the air in the apartment felt heavier. I dressed deliberately, pressed navy blouse, hair pulled back, earrings that said competent but not flashy. I printed out a few documents just in case. Even though I knew I wouldn't need them yet, I wanted to be the one who walked into that meeting prepared. But before I could get to the office, something else arrived. An email popped up while I was still at the kitchen counter. Toast untouched beside me. Subject: Leadership Summit Update. I opened it slowly, like peeling back gauze from an old wound. Dear Callista, due to an internal concern raised about academic verification, we must unfortunately withdraw your invitation to speak at this year's Women in Impact Summit. I didn't even finish reading the rest before hitting print. I circled the phrase internal concern in red pen, underlined it twice, and filed the letter in my growing folder of proof. The one labeled truth. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I didn't call anyone. I just filed it away. Around noon, I checked my phone during a short break at my desk. The family group chat had lit up. My cousin Lindsay had posted a long, emoji-filled message. So thrilled to have Marla as my maid of honor. Can't wait for you all to see the dress we picked. I read it 3 times. Not because it shocked me, but because it didn't. Months ago, I'd promised to be her maid of honor. I'd even helped her pick out the venue. Now, not a word. No follow-up, no text, no explanation. No one in the chat mentioned me. Not even to ask, wait, wasn't Callista? I started typing a reply, something dry and sarcastic, but deleted it. Instead, I took a screenshot and saved it to my folder, right next to the email from the summit. At this point, screenshots said more than I ever could. That night, I sat in my car outside the apartment for almost 15 minutes before walking inside. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was festering just beneath the surface of all these smiles and niceties. Like everyone had agreed to pretend I was crazy, as long as they all did it together. I called my mom. Hi, I said evenly. Quick question. Did you say anything to the summit board? A pause. Then, sweetheart, I think you're overreacting. Marla mentioned something about being concerned, but she's just protective, you know? She didn't mean anything by it. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. She's not protective. She's calculated. And you're enabling her. Callista, I'm not asking for your permission, I said, sharper now. I'm asking if you're going to be honest, just once. I just think you're being a little too sensitive about all this. That word, sensitive, the polite term families use to discredit women when they don't want to admit they've done something cruel. I hung up without saying goodbye. Later that night, I sat at my desk and wrote a brief email to Marla. Subject: Your last move. I don't know what you told them, but this is your last free pass. One more step, and I go public. With everything. She replied within 5 minutes. Dramatic. No greeting, no punctuation. Just that single word. I stared at it for a while. Not because I was hurt, but because it was so obvious. She didn't even try to hide the manipulation anymore. She had pushed me for years, but now I had lines she didn't see coming. Quiet ones, but steel hard all the same. The next evening, I forced myself to show up at a small nonprofit networking event, one I'd RSVP'd 2 weeks ago. I didn't want to be there, but staying home meant letting her steal one more space from me. The room was filled with name tags, cheap wine, and business cards printed on recycled paper. I stood near the table of cheese cubes and tried to pretend I was listening to a woman explain her work with sustainable housing when I heard it. She's the one who lied about graduating, right? The voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was designed to land like a dart. The kind of sentence you say half-turned, half-smiling, just loud enough for it to hurt, but not loud enough for anyone to confront you about it. I didn't hesitate. I turned around, locked eyes with the man who said it. Gray suit, red pocket square, the type who probably called himself a connector on LinkedIn, and walked right up to him. Google me again in 2 weeks, I said quietly, but clearly, and spell the name right this time. Then I turned and walked away. Head up, hands steady, spine straight. By the time I got home that night, the only thing louder than my footsteps across the hardwood floor was the sentence still echoing in my head. Google me again in 2 weeks. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my bag by the door, and opened the fridge. Half a container of hummus, expired yogurt, and a bottle of Pinot I'd been saving for something that felt like winning. I poured myself a glass anyway and sat on the couch, scrolling through my inbox. There it was. Subject: Final speech draft. Donor night. I opened the attached document, already expecting the worst. It was my speech, technically, but every sharp line had been dulled, every truth diluted. The section where I mentioned my time at CU Boulder, deleted. The sentence where I talked about being the first woman in my family to graduate without help, gone. Instead, there was this. We've removed the education reference to avoid distractions. Hope you understand. They always said that when they wanted you to accept censorship without the messiness of confrontation. Hope you understand. Translation: Sit down, stay quiet, be grateful. I printed both versions, the original I had submitted and the one they neutered. Filed them in my red folder, the one marked silenced. I didn't respond to the email. Not because I didn't have words, but because mine deserved a microphone, not a reply chain. The next day, I sat across from my supervisor, Ms. Rawlings, a woman with good intentions and terrible timing. Some board members felt it safer to keep things neutral right now, she said gently, her fingers fidgeting with the cap of her pen. I looked at her. Not angrily, just directly. Neutrality isn't safety, it's surrender. She said nothing. I stood up, smiled like a woman who'd outgrown the need for approval, and left the room. That evening, I received a call, the kind I used to answer without hesitation. Hi, sweetie, my mother said, her voice soft, rehearsed. I talked to Marla. She feels awful about how things have escalated. She never wanted it to go this far. She wanted them to be cautious, that's all. I let the silence linger a moment. When a match burns down a house, I said slowly, it doesn't get praise for not torching the neighbors. She inhaled through her nose, sharp, annoyed. This all could have been avoided if you didn't push so hard. You always need to have the last word. There it was. The real voice. The one behind every veiled apology and passive dig. I didn't yell, didn't hang up in anger. I just ended the call without another word. The following Friday, the donor event arrived. I had RSVP'd weeks ago, back when they still listed me as the closing speaker. I wasn't officially on the schedule anymore, but I still showed up, wearing the same blazer I wore at my real graduation, the one nobody attended. The room buzzed with social niceties and clicky heels, people sipping wine and complimenting each other's small talk. I stood near the back, blending in, until someone handed me a program. Marla was listed as special guest. I didn't need to guess who added her. She arrived just after the keynote, wearing her usual shade of passive elegance and carrying a guest pass with my organization's logo on it. I didn't react. As the event wrapped, a staff member whispered in my ear, "Would you like to say a few words before we close?" I nodded, walked slowly to the podium. No notes, no paper. I looked out at the crowd, not as someone begging to be heard, but as someone who had already survived being ignored. "When silence takes the place of truth," I began, "don't be surprised when lies get comfortable." The room went still. I won't be delivering the version of this speech that was rewritten without me. I'll deliver the full story, on my terms, just not tonight, but soon. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I had found the edge of fear and walked past it. I stepped down. Marla's eyes found mine across the room. She wasn't angry, she was unreadable, which for her meant worried. I went home that night and slept deeply for the first time in weeks, until morning. The email arrived just before 7 a.m. Subject, legal notice, cease and desist. The sender was anonymous, but the signature footer was identical to Marla's work emails. The formatting, the spacing, even the misspelled "sincerely" she always overlooked. They wanted escalation? I came prepared. I didn't even finish brushing my teeth before forwarding the email to my attorney. No subject line, no body text, just the document. The message spoke for itself. A formal cease and desist, vague and cowardly, signed anonymously but structured with all the usual Marla hallmarks, her preferred font, her awkward spacing, and that same misspelled "sincerely" she'd been using in work memos for years. No one else forgets the second E. I didn't feel fear this time. I felt insulted. I stood in my kitchen in slippers, toothbrush still foaming in the sink, and opened my file cabinet. By 10:30 a.m., I was sitting in my lawyer's office, across from an oak desk stacked with paper I had curated like a museum exhibit. Everything she might need was in the binder I slid across to her. Tabbed, dated, categorized. Transcripts, letters of recommendation, digital timestamps, tax records tied to my financial aid packages, even a saved voicemail from my academic advisor congratulating me on finishing my thesis. She flipped through the pages slowly, her brow tightening. "You built a litigation-proof resume," she said, sounding more impressed than surprised. "I had to. I was never given the luxury of being assumed innocent." She closed the binder gently and exhaled. "We're not going to wait for them to make the next move." I nodded. By early afternoon, she'd fired off a formal notice to the domain registrar, hosting the email that had delivered the threat. Simultaneously, she requested IP tracing logs, just in case we needed to prove digital origin. I went home and opened LinkedIn, sat for a moment with my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Then I typed, "There comes a time when silence becomes complicity. I've done nothing wrong, but I have been wronged, and I will no longer allow others to write my story in whispers." I hit post and closed the screen. By dinner, the post had been shared over 400 times. I didn't refresh it again. The next day, I was summoned into a meeting with the board of directors at work. It wasn't disciplinary, not officially, but the air in that conference room had that same stale hush as a funeral parlor before the casket arrives. "Callista," one of the board members began. "Gary, the kind who always wore loafers without socks. We just want to get a sense of your perspective. You understand why this has created some discomfort for our donors, yes?" I leaned forward, not smiling, not trembling. "No," I said. but I do understand why truth tends to make people nervous when they've built comfort around control. Ms. Rawlings, my direct supervisor, sat in the far corner, arms crossed. She didn't say a word, but when our eyes met, there was no challenge in hers, only quiet respect. They didn't press further. They knew better. Later that afternoon, while cleaning out old paperwork in my office drawer, I found the envelope I had used to mail my original graduation paperwork years ago, back when you had to physically submit documents before employers trusted PDFs. That night, it felt poetic. When I got home, another message was waiting, this time from the University of Colorado Boulder. We affirm that Ms. Callista Dreyer graduated with distinction in 2011. No record exists of fraud or pending investigation regarding her academic standing. I scanned it, uploaded the file, and added a caption. Not for validation, for documentation. Because I've never been the liar. No hashtags, no calls for justice. Just the facts. Later that evening, as I was shutting down for the night, I heard a soft tap against my front door. 3 short knocks, deliberate. When I opened it, no one was there. Only a plain manila envelope left on the doormat. I looked down both sides of the hallway. Nothing. Silence. Back inside, I placed the envelope on my desk and opened it carefully. Inside, a printed PDF, several pages thick. No header, no footer, but immediately recognizable. Screenshots of an internal company Slack chat. Marla's name, front and center. The messages were time-stamped over the past 2 weeks. Conversations with a colleague, someone from her job, about sowing doubt, managing optics, and making Callista look unstable without directly accusing her. One line stood out. If we keep the pressure up, she'll break. She always needs people to believe she's better than she is. At the bottom of the final page was a note in Sharpie, scribbled in unfamiliar handwriting. You didn't deserve this. Thought you should know. No return address, no name. But the truth was enough. I sat back in my chair, closed the file, and let the quiet settle around me again. Not as a burden this time, but as armor. I folded the screenshots, placed them neatly into my black binder, and whispered only to myself, now we're done playing defense. I drove to my attorney's office with the envelope in my passenger seat like it was ticking. She was already waiting when I arrived, coffee in hand, blazer draped over her chair, calm in the way only someone used to seeing messes unfold could be. I didn't waste time. This, I said, sliding the contents across the desk, is how she's been playing. She read in silence, flipping page by page. No reaction, just a slow, focused intake of the facts. When she reached the Slack messages, she glanced up, mouth pressed into a firm line. We'll draft a cease and desist directly to her, she said. No more indirect games. Within the hour, the document was done and filed. Name on the header, date stamped, every screen grab attached for context. I didn't need embellishment. The truth was heavy enough. Back at my office, I took a deep breath and opened a new email. Subject, for transparency, my truth, her strategy. I attached the full file, sent it to every board member of our organization. No explanation, no preamble, no plea. They wanted to know why I'd been quiet? I let the facts speak for me. Within 24 hours, the fallout started. First, 3 board members resigned. The public reason, a misalignment of values. Privately, I knew it was about liability. Nobody wants their name tied to a scandal when the evidence is digital, time-stamped, and public-facing. Then, the memo leaked. An internal communication surfaced. Someone on the inside had forwarded it to a local journalist. It revealed that the organization had begun reviewing the employees' academic records due to ongoing family conflict and external concerns. There had never been a formal complaint. The media spun fast. One headline read, "Non-profit leader targeted by sister in credential smear." By noon the next day, my inbox was flooded. Reporters, advocates, strangers with similar stories, women thanking me for not letting the lie stick. And then came the message I wasn't expecting. A woman from Marla's office, someone I didn't know, reached out through LinkedIn. It was short. She's been suspended pending an internal investigation. I don't think she expected this to spiral. That line stuck with me. Didn't expect this to spiral. Marla had always controlled the narrative so skillfully that she thought she was untouchable. But truth doesn't ask for permission. It just waits. The family thread exploded next. An aunt posted, no context. "Marla, what did you do?" An uncle chimed in. "I always knew Callista was the only one who never needed to be praised to have value." My phone buzzed seconds later. "Mom, I didn't answer." She tried again. I still didn't pick up. Then she texted, "Please, don't let this destroy the family." I replied, "You never stopped her. You only stopped calling it love when it got inconvenient." I didn't wait for a response. 2 days later, she came to my workplace. Marla. She was standing outside the building when I arrived from lunch, coat half-zipped, hair undone in a way that made her look more human than I remembered. Less polished. She looked like someone who'd finally run out of alibis. "You could have handled this in private," she said, voice low, barely contained. "You didn't have to make it public." I held my bag tighter but didn't move. "You made me invisible for years," I said calmly. "Now everyone sees you. That's not on me." Her face cracked for just a second. That flicker of vulnerability, the kind you almost believe if you didn't know better. "You think you're better than me now?" "No," I said. "I think I've always been better than how you treated me." She flinched, then straightened. "This isn't over." "No," I agreed. "It's finally beginning." I walked past her and into the building. That night, I got a call from a news producer. One of the major outlets had picked up the story and wanted an exclusive. "We want your voice on this," she said. "But we want it to come from you, unedited." I paused, fingers wrapped around the base of my wine glass, then brought the phone to my ear. "I'll do it," I said, "but only if I get to write the ending." The morning after I agreed to the interview, I sat on my balcony with a cup of lukewarm coffee and no appetite. The sky was clear. Not a poetic kind of clear, just empty. Flat blue stretching across a city that was still waking up. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. The notification wasn't from a news alert or social media feed. It was a calendar reminder. Interview scheduled, 12:30 p.m., live feature call. I didn't need the reminder. I hadn't stopped thinking about it since I hung up the night before. At noon, I took my seat at the desk in my home office. The blinds were half closed, light pouring through like a spotlight over my laptop. I'd cleaned the background behind me, removed family photos, pushed the frame of my diploma just off camera. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew the irony would be too sharp to ignore. 12:29. I clicked the Zoom link. 12:30 on the dot. A young producer appeared, smiled politely, then introduced the interviewer, a woman with sharp questions and a voice that knew how to thread empathy into exposure. And then it began. They called the article, "Erased by Blood, One Woman's Fight for Her Name." By evening, it was trending across platforms. It wasn't sensational, it was surgical. Screenshots of the Slack messages, snippets from the cease and desist letter, the university's confirmation, dates, quotes, and silence. My silence, finally broken. I didn't watch the interview again. I didn't need to. But the comments started to pour in. "I don't know you, but I see you." She fought back the right way. "I kept my mouth shut for too long. Thank you for reminding me how loud quiet can be." It wasn't fame. It was recognition. A different kind of visibility. One that wasn't filtered through Marla's version of me. That same night, I got a text from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Just 2 sentences. "She's been staying at your mom's. She hasn't said a word in 2 days." I stared at it for a while, then locked my phone. 2 days later, during the soft opening weekend of the Women's Center I'd spent the past year helping build, she showed up. Marla. She didn't walk in. She didn't even step up to the glass doors. She stood at the edge of the parking lot, arms folded across her chest, eyes fixed on the building like she was daring it to speak first. I saw her through the window as I set out chairs for the next group. I stepped outside. The afternoon air was cool, breezy. We stood a few feet apart, facing each other. There was no crowd, no camera, no script. "I never thought you'd go through with it," she said. Her voice was cracked at the edges. "That's always been your mistake," I replied. "You never believed I could finish what I start." She looked down, then back up, eyes wet, but defiant. "I messed up. I know I did. I didn't mean to hurt you like that." I waited. She continued, softer now. "I wanted to be the one who mattered. I was afraid people would see you and forget me." There it was. The real reason. Not rage, not logic, fear. "Forgive me?" she asked, barely above a whisper. I looked at her, not with hatred, not with sympathy, just clarity. "I'm not your secret to bury anymore." I turned and walked back inside. That evening, I got another message. This one from someone who had once been a best friend. Someone who'd stopped responding when the rumors were loudest. "I'm sorry, I should have stood by you." I stared at the text for a minute, then typed, "You knew the truth. You just didn't want to be the one to say it." I hit send. Not with bitterness, but with boundaries. Later that night, after the center had quieted, I returned home, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at my desk. I opened the draft I'd started months ago, an op-ed titled, "This is what being believed feels like." I reread the last line, the one that had come to me during one of the loneliest nights in this process. I don't need the apology anymore, but I needed the clarity of who I've become. I didn't hit publish, not yet, but this time I knew exactly when I would. The air was still cool when I unlocked the front doors of the center that morning. 6 weeks had passed since the interview went live, and the dust had settled. Not entirely, but enough that the silence no longer felt dangerous. It felt earned. The first session of our leadership series was starting in 20 minutes. I turned on the lights in the lobby, ran my hand along the edges of the reception desk, straightened a few chairs that had been nudged out of place. Little rituals, small ways to say, "This space is ready." The women trickled in slowly, some alone, some in pairs. Most were in their 20s or early 30s, and nearly all walked through the door with the same blend of nervous energy and quiet resolve I remembered so vividly from my own early days. Not everyone knows how much it takes just to show up. Behind the desk, hanging slightly off-center on the wall, was the quote I'd chosen months ago. "You are not what they say. You are what you finish." It had no author listed, not because I didn't want credit, but because it wasn't mine to own. It belonged to every woman who'd ever been told she wasn't enough, until she proved she was. As the door clicked shut behind the last guest, I took a breath and walked toward the meeting room, ready to begin. That afternoon, as I stepped outside to take a short walk between sessions, I spotted her. My mother. She was standing across the street, partially hidden by the branches of a tree, hands folded in front of her, unsure whether to step forward or walk away. I didn't wave, but I didn't turn my back either. After a moment, I crossed the street. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in years, she didn't seem like she was trying to fix anything. She just looked tired, human. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out at first. "You always looked like your father when you were upset," she finally said. "But now you just look like yourself." I nodded once. Not with warmth, not with anger, just acknowledgement. "I'm not angry anymore," I said quietly, "but I'm also not coming back." She blinked a few times, as if that was what she feared most. Then she gave a small nod and stepped aside. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. But we didn't hurt each other either. Later that evening, I opened my journal and wrote only one sentence. Some people think apologies need to be accepted. I think sometimes they need to echo unanswered. I never mentioned Marla again. Not in writing, not in conversation. There was no dramatic final call, no confrontational lunch, just nothing. That was the closure. Not silence as punishment, but as choice. 1 week later, an invitation arrived in the mail. A cousin was hosting a reunion. A backyard barbecue with a bounce house for the kids, 3 kinds of potato salad, and a homemade slideshow. I didn't hesitate. I RSVP'd with a single sentence. "Thank you, but I'm building my own traditions now." That was all. Boundaries don't always have to slam. Sometimes they just don't budge. And then, finally, one night, not prompted by a headline or a memory, or even a moment of rage, I sat down and opened my draft. How it feels to outlive the story they told about you. I reread every line, made no changes. It didn't need edits. I hit publish. There was no viral rush, no dramatic unveiling. It moved quietly through circles of people who needed it. And that was enough. The responses trickled in over days, and most of them weren't grand declarations, just whispers back. "Me too." "I see you." "Thank you." On the final page, I'd written, "I didn't get justice from them, but I got it from time, from truth, and from choosing myself over silence." That weekend, I climbed to the rooftop of my building with a cup of tea in hand, letting the late morning sun press gently against my skin. There were no crowds, no speeches, just me and the light. Inside, on the wall of my home office, the diploma still hung, right where I'd placed it after everything. Not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to honor the girl who never stopped finishing what she started. Before I end this story, I want to leave you with something personal. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that your name is more than a line on a certificate or a mention at a dinner table. It's how you carry yourself when no one claps. It's how you stand up when you're expected to shrink. And sometimes, it's what you have left when everyone else has walked away. Truth doesn't always come with justice, but it always comes with clarity. And in my case, that clarity became peace. So if you're listening to this and you've ever been doubted, overlooked, replaced, or worse, erased, please hear me. You are not what they said. You are what you chose to become in spite of it. And if you had to rebuild your name from the ground up, I hope you honor it like I did. Not for them, but for you. Let me ask you something before we go. Have you ever had to fight for your name, your truth, your place at the table? Or did someone in your life try to rewrite your story for you? I'd love to hear about it. If this story touched something in you, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're tuning in from. If it didn't quite hit the mark for you, I'd still love to know why. Let's talk about it. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and rooted in what makes us human, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. There's always another story to tell, and I'd be honored if you joined me for the next one. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care of your name. It's worth protecting.